Hi, John Dixon here from the Centre for Public Christianity. We're here talking with Professor John Lennox from Oxford University, and today we want to talk about the evils of Christendom. John, this is a big topic, and it's one the new atheists raise often. In fact, my feeling is it's perhaps the most potent of their arguments. There's something to it, isn't there? Religion has abused people left, right and centre throughout history.
Oh, there's a lot to it. I come from Northern Ireland, and that probably to many people says it all. The sectarian violence and all this kind of thing. Now, I know it's complex, and religion is not the only thing, but it's certainly a very real factor. And the new atheists, I think, are saying important things here and drawing attention to a blot, certainly a very big blot on Christianity. Now, I can only speak for Christianity. I can't speak for other religions. And my response to the question is to face it head on and say that as a Christian, I'm ashamed that the name of Christ has been associated with violence and abuse. Why am I ashamed? Because Christ himself abjured these things. He's on record as saying that his disciples weren't to use swords to fight. They weren't to use physical violence to protect him or to further his message. And the reason for that is very obvious. He claimed to be the truth. He claimed to be a carrier of a message of forgiveness and love and peace with God. And the one thing you cannot do is impose truth, whether it's by force, whether it's secular or religious. You cannot do it by force. And I think it's very important to notice historically that Jesus Christ was accused of the very thing the new atheists are accusing Christianity of. That is, stirring up religious violence. And the Roman governor, Pilate, publicly exonerated him from it when he heard Jesus say, "My kingdom is not of this world, otherwise my servants would have been fighting." That is when he was arrested. And Pilate would have had the report from the centurion saying that not only had Jesus not resisted arrest, but one of his disciples foolishly used a sword and cut off a chap's ear, and Jesus had put the ear back on. And so it's very important that that statement of Pilate's historically at the trial of Christ is there, because we know what Christ's stance was. My conclusion, that people that use violence and abuse are not following Christ, they're disobeying him.
But the list of abuses and violence and imperialism in the name of Christ is so long.
Yes, it's terrible.
Jesus can't take the blame, that's obvious, but has Christianity failed?
Well, it's people who fail. Solzhenitsyn said, didn't he, the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every man. And I think that people have failed because they have not clearly kept in mind one of the fundamentals of Christianity. Do you remember Jesus' statement, "Render to Caesar the things of Caesar, and to God's the things that are God's"? And they become imperialistic because they've confused the state and religion. And it seems to me that was an extremely retrograde step. And it stamped its face in history ever since the time of Constantine, essentially.
But I can imagine people thinking then the Christian faith has no power to change lives. You're just saying Christians are like everyone else. Sure, it's got a lovely love message, but it actually doesn't work.
But it does work because, and that's very noticeable in the new atheist writing, is that they try to load all the blame on religion, but they don't tell us about the positive contribution of Christianity. Our hospitals, for example, that are so important to all of us, they didn't always exist. Caring for abandoned babies was a Christian thing. Developing hospices was a Christian thing. Indeed, the effect of Christianity is so deep that Jürgen Habermas, who's one of today's leading intellectuals on the continent, and a man who describes himself incidentally as a methodological atheist, says that Christianity and nothing else lies at the foundation of European freedoms, laws, human rights. And there is nothing else, and then he adds, interestingly, everything else is postmodern chatter. And it doesn't help the new atheist cause to be distorted. But I want to go further than that and say that their arguments are distorted in another very serious direction. They're wrong about Christianity in that they confuse genuine Christianity with the abuses of Christendom. They need to learn to distinguish. They expect me to distinguish between atheists. There are peace-loving atheists. There are atheists like Stalin. And that brings me to the next thing. We need to ask the question, what is the record of atheism in this respect? I'm prepared to face the record of professing Christianity, but interestingly enough, we look at Richard Dawkins, and what he says is he doesn't know of an atheist who would bulldoze the cathedrals of Chartres and Notre Dame. Has he never heard of what Stalin did? And here you see their attempt to get rid of religion and introduce atheism, when in the 20th century we've seen multi-millions of people, before which the numbers tragically killed by professing Christendom pale into insignificance. Mao, Stalin, Pol Pot, in the name of an ideology that at its heart is atheistic.
The new atheists dispute this. I know Christopher Hitchens argues that actually communism was a religious ideology without God. So it's another example of religion abusing society. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to it by the fact that when I told my friends in Eastern Europe that, they laughed and said, send them over here to learn what it was like to live under a regime like that. The complication in that kind of a statement by Hitchens and Dawkins is that there is a religious emotion among people, and it can be harnessed. The Romans harnessed it to worship the state, and so on. But to then describe it as a religion is really a fatal mistake, because read Marx. The very first thing he said that drove everything else was criticism of religion is the foundation of all criticism. God had to go. And any analysis that doesn't take that on board, I think, misses the point. There's a very interesting argument given by David Berlinski, who's a Jew by background, a secular Jew, not a theist, as far as one can tell, an atheist. But he, commenting on this whole attitude, and the same kind of thing about Hitler, you know, Hitler came from a Christian background and the Nazis were all Christians.
Well, Vic Stenger the other night said that Hitler was a Christian.
Well, that's exactly right. He hasn't read Hitler's Table Talk, obviously, where Hitler says that he saw through the poison of Christianity as a boy. And he talks about the ancient world was pure in its thinking, because it didn't have the virus of Christianity or the pox. It sounds very much like a new atheist I've read saying that religion is a virus of the mind and so on. Actually, Hitler was talking about that a long time ago.
I interrupted you and you were talking about Berlinski.
Berlinski's point is this. He tells the story of a Jew who was about to be shot by the Gestapo. And what happened was this, that as the man raised his gun, the Jew said to him, God is watching you, and he was shot dead. And Berlinski says, whatever you make of the religious influences and Stalin as a young man studying for the priesthood or in Hitler, the one thing they did not believe was that God was watching them. And I think that's a very powerful point. In other words, they had no sense to say they are Christians, put a label on them like that when they manifestly abjured it, is a nonsense. But I think it's made much more powerful if we say they did not believe that God was a reality. One could wish they had believed that God was watching them.